Tonight, we are missing a lot of our folks from different places, but we have some folks from other places with us too. We're glad you're here. Thankful for your presence. We want to continue tonight a study that we've been engaged in for a little while on the Song of Solomon. Lessons from the song. They are, I think, useful, practical, needed lessons. I think this book generally is a neglected book, and that's the fault of teachers by and large. We said in the beginning, this book begins with the words, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And just in brief, when you think about that title, that God-given title, it represents several important truths. In the first place, it's a song. Sometimes people struggle with the way this song is written, and it's hard sometimes to tell who's talking, and it has almost a dreamlike quality to it at times. But that's a song. It's a song of songs. If I read this book and I think, well, I don't get much out of this, the problem is not with the song. The Holy Spirit said it's the song of songs. It's the greatest song. And so it's not the song that's defective, it's my understanding that's defective. And it really admonishes me to work on it and to appreciate it more. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And I believe certainly Solomon is the author of this book, and I think he's a character in this book. There are a lot of views of the Song of Solomon that you'll run into, and what yours may be, I'm not sure. But my own view is that Solomon, though he is the author of the book, and in the book, he's not the protagonist of the book, he's not the hero of the book. There are those who read this and think this is King Solomon and this woman and how that they marry and they teach us about marriage. I don't believe Solomon is God's instrument through which he's going to show my example. Follow my example in marriage. We just know too much about Solomon to believe that in the first place. And I don't think that's the way it's written. I believe Solomon, the king, has indeed taken this woman, the Shulamite, into his possession, into his house. In the very first chapter, she laments the fact that the king has brought me into his chambers. But her mind, her heart is on her beloved, a young man, a shepherd, as he describes him in chapter 1, that she knew back at home. Wherever they are exactly, whether they're at the king's palace in Jerusalem or some other place, I think you find there the struggle. The king who makes his advances at her, not to force her, but to woo her and to try to make her one of his own, one of his many wives, and her heart which is given to this shepherd. And I believe God, through her loyalty and her view of love and his view, the shepherd's view of love, teaches us about the glory of monogamy and a monogamous romantic relationship as God designed it, as opposed to the corruption that Solomon had surrendered to. Much like with Ecclesiastes, I think this book is a book by Solomon about his younger years, but written later in his life to describe, with sadness, the waste he had made of so many gifts, including marriage. A man who's got 1,000 wives, as Solomon did ultimately, doesn't know what a marriage is. He never had one wife, really, not in the sense that God wanted or God intended for him to have. So that's my perspective of the book. And I appreciate your consideration of it. We are tonight ready to start there in chapter 3 and verse 1, where we see these words. Let's just read them together. This is from the old translation. By night upon my bed I sought him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. I will rise now and go about the city and the streets. In the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not. The watchman that goes about the city found me, to whom I said, Saw ye him whom my soul loveth? It was but a little that I passed from them, but I found him whom my soul loveth. And I held him and would not let him go until I had brought him into my mother's house, into the chamber of her that conceived me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and the hinds of the field, that you stir not up nor awake my love till he please. I think what we find here is the retelling of a dream that this woman had. I'm not sure if these events happened actually. That expression, by night on my bed, gives us a clue. Actually, I think more particularly, this by night is in the plural, by nights. Some of the modern translations read night after night. Here is this woman, the Shulamite. As I understand it, she is away from her beloved. She is in the possession of, the custody sounds like a harsh word, of the king, who makes his advances upon her, but her heart is with him. And when she dreams of him. She longs for him. So the dream in this passage is that she's looking for him. She goes out in the night into the streets to see if she can find him. A very strange thing if we're talking about Solomon. In the first place, who would expect to see Solomon walking up and down the street? And secondly, when you think about the king, he's already got her in his possession. Why would she be looking for him? She's desiring something she does not have, and that is access to her beloved. And so she asked those watchmen of the city, and they're no help. By the way, I think we can find over in chapter 5 a parallel account here. Another dream that she had that's a little bit different in its outcome. But in chapter 5 and verse 2, I sleep, but my heart awakes. It is the voice of my beloved knocking. I think here we find again she's dreaming night after night about finding her beloved. And after she gets away from those city watchmen that are no help, she's not finding help where she is to find her beloved. But she finds him anyway. And what does she do? She held him. That's a great word. It's the same word in the Greek Old Testament that's used over in Matthew 28. You remember when the Lord, after he was raised from the dead, he encountered the women who came to the tomb? And the text says that those women, when they realized that it was Jesus, they grabbed hold of him and they used the same word, held him by the feet, as if they'd never let him go. That's the idea here. We see the picture of this woman finding her beloved. It's what she wants most. And what does she do? She brings him to her mother's house. Again, not literally, but it's in this dream. That's what she wants to do. Take him back to her mother's house to marry him, to begin a family with him. The family, her family, would be thrilled about the beloved and she together. Taking Solomon back to her mother's house out in the country seems like a strange picture. But at any rate, this is what she wants, her beloved. And then again, this is repeated from chapter 2 and verse 7. I charge you, ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and hinds of the field, that you stir not up nor awake my love till it please. This is a refrain we find several times in the book. And I believe that the point is a little bit hidden in the beginning, and maybe I'm not exactly sure what she means by the invoking the roes and hinds of the field. But it seems evident that what she's saying to this crowd of women who seem to be putting pressure on her to submit, to knuckle under, why are you after some guy that's not here out in the country somewhere? You've got this great opportunity. She's saying, don't talk to me that way. The old translation maybe doesn't do us the best service here. Do not stir up nor awake my love. That almost sounds like she's talking about an individual. I don't think so. Maybe your translation puts it better. Do not stir or awake love till it please. What she's saying is, I do not want you to put this pressure on me to go along and to just be one of Solomon's many wives. Love must not be forced into that kind of a pigeonhole based upon some material advantage. By the way, there are plenty of women who would. They'd be thrilled to do that. Thrilled to line up there with the rest of them. The prestige of being in the royal house and all the things that came with that. I'm sure they dressed well, they ate well. I'm sure they had deference from those around. But she was looking for something higher. Her idea of a marriage relationship was a lot more. And a lot more in God's terms than selling out for a relationship like that. Don't force me to do that. It reminds me a little bit of, when Paul was heading to Jerusalem and his companion said, don't do that, there's danger waiting. You remember what he said to them? Why do you weep and break my heart? maybe this is a little bit like this. He's saying, why do you keep asking me to do something that's unnatural and that's against, really, the picture of marriage as God gave it? The roes and hinds of the field, in that sense, have more sense. They behave more naturally and less contrived way than what you're asking me to do. In the next scene, and again, this is a song, and so we see these pictures, these images. They all fit together, but it's not a police report. It's not a straight narrative where, the subject went from this block, got in their car, drove down to this. Sometimes it jumps about a bit. But we find in the next scene a picture of the royal carriage. Let's read together again from chapter 3, beginning in verse 6. The old translation reads, "Who is this that cometh out of the wilderness like pillars of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the powders of the merchant? Behold his bed, which is Solomon's. 80 valiant men are about it, of the valiant of Israel. And they all hold swords, being experts in war. Every man hath his sword upon his thigh, because of fear in the night. King Solomon made himself, a chariot of the wood of Lebanon. He made the pillars thereof of silver, the bottom thereof of gold, the covering of it of purple, in the midst thereof being paved with love for the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth, O ye daughters of Zion. Behold King Solomon with the crown wherewith his mother crowned him in the day of his espousals and in the day of the gladness of his heart." What's going on here? What is this about? Well, in the first place, I think it's interesting to ask the question, who is it that is in that chariot? It's Solomon's. So you figure Solomon would be there. Is he alone? Is somebody with him? I think they would be talking not so much about who is Solomon there, but who would be accompanying him. Some of the translations may reflect this. I'm told that in the Hebrew, and I don't know anything about Hebrew, but in the Hebrew the pronoun is in the feminine form. And so it could be translated, who is she that comes out of the wilderness? Now it's obvious that Solomon would be there, but who is this woman? Those who see Song of Solomon as the story of Solomon the Shulamite, they have no question about this. They think, well, this is Solomon picking her up and taking her back to Jerusalem. Well, it may be her. It could be somebody else as well. The last verse in this reading here suggests that Solomon was wearing the crown wherewith his mother crowned him in the day of his espousals, in the day of his wedding. Is this talking about Solomon and his wedding to the Shulamite? There are those who say so. He takes her in, he marries her, he sleeps with her, end of story. I don't believe that Solomon ever married the Shulamite, and I don't believe that he then took her as a new bride and had relations with her. I'm not sure who this woman is. It could be this woman, being the Shulamite, being taken back to Solomon's possession, and maybe he intended to marry her, or it could be somebody else. When he talks about how that his mother gave him a crown, or crowned him with the crown of the day of his espousals, it occurs to us that even though this might have been in the younger years of Solomon, maybe he hadn't yet reached 1,000 wives, or that includes the concubine wives, 700 wives. But I'll tell you, if he had a crown that he wore when he got married, he must have worn it out. 700 wives? Even over 40 years, that's about 17 or 18 a day, or 18 a year, I should say. 17 or 18 marriages a year? It does not seem impossible to me that even while he's showing his attention to the Shulamite, he might have brought another one in order to marry her. Solomon was not looking at this marriage in the way that we ought to look at marriage. That's obvious in the way he lived. So who the woman is, I'm not sure. It could be the Shulamite, or it could well be another woman that he's bringing in, some political marriage, some reason, and he's dressed for the wedding. But I'll tell you what he never understood. He never understood the concept of, I am my beloved and he is mine. That kind of monogamy was not Solomon's choice. God's choice, but not Solomon's choice. Let me notice this with you. What's he writing in? His bed, the old translation says. Maybe your translation says something else, a carriage. It describes a palanquin, a portable couch. We've seen these before, maybe in movies or museums or somewhere. They were found in the East and the West. Here's Queen Elizabeth I being carried on such a device. And you can see these, as I said, in different cultures. This very fancy portable couch in which the king and the queen or whoever it might be would be carried along in a litter, as it's called sometimes. So it's grand indeed. It is, first of all, well guarded. You remember how he says in verse 7, 80 valiant men are about it, all holding swords, all guarding against the terrors of the night. You know, this is something that perhaps a guy like me who is so far removed from that kind of lifestyle doesn't think about. Several years ago, Judd and I traveled down through South Georgia together, and we had a little time. And so we pulled off the highway at a place called Plains, Georgia. You guys, maybe that doesn't ring a bell unless you're my age, but Plains, Georgia was the home of Jimmy Carter, who was 39th President of the United States, I think. Just died here a little while back. Whatever you think of his politics, and I didn't think much of it, but that doesn't matter. But still, he's a fascinating story. A guy who grows up in rural Georgia and becomes the chief executive officer of the country. That's amazing. So we both agree, let's just stop by and see it. By the way, it doesn't take long to see Plains, Georgia. We pulled up there, and there's a little strip mall. It used to be. That's been 15 years ago, whatever it was. And they have a store there where they sell all kind of things, including Mr. Carter's books and all kind of souvenirs. People still, I guess, come through Plains, Georgia. And so if you walk out of that and you're looking now out at the area, there's a peanut field over here. You know, he was a peanut farmer for a long time, big-time peanut farmer. Now over here, that's where he went to school. That's the whatever they call Plains High School. Still, same building right there. Right here is the Baptist church that he grew up in. Taught Sunday school in. Attended the whole time he lived there, right there. So you can stand in one spot and see his history almost. The one thing we couldn't see from that spot, by the way, there's a little, the old railroad house there. Back again in the 70s, the reporters would all stand in front of that when they were giving their report from the Carter headquarters and so on. Anyway, that's right there. But I knew his house was still standing where he grew up. And so we went in and asked the lady, I said, where's the Carter home? And she said, well, it's down this road about 3 miles, but you can't get in there. And I said, well, why not? She said, well, the Secret Service will stop you. I said, no, ma'am, I didn't mean his house where he lives now. I wasn't planning on going in and having dinner with him. Where did he grow up? Oh, that's down this road about 2 miles. But anyway, we did ride by both of them. And sure enough, you can ride by Mr. Carter's home, or his former home, and you can't see the house very well. There's a long distance between it and the road, and there are 2 big guard shacks right there, and a fence. Now, when we went by there, I don't remember what year it was exactly, but I mean, he'd been out of office 30 years. But you know, if you're President of the United States, you'll have Secret Service protection the rest of your life. You know that? And you won't ever be able to open up a piece of mail by yourself anymore. You will never be able to drive a car by yourself anymore. You will have some guard within eyesight of you or right out the door the rest of your life. Does that sound like fun or does that sound like prison? You know, there's another side to this. And so I'm thinking about this little detail given to us here about Solomon's litter, his palanquin, and about how all the guards were around him. They were always around him because there were all kind of threats around him. He did not know the freedom that I know. I can go to Piggly Wiggly all by myself if I want to. I don't know why I would, but I can. But you can't do that if you're King Solomon. You can't do that if you're president. And I'm just thinking about the Shulamite and looking at this life and thinking, it's pretty fancy. You just think about the chariot itself, silver and gold and the wood of the finest kind and the purple. But it's a bit of a gilded cage. So she wasn't a fool after all. Maybe she was the wise one in saying no thank you to that kind of life. I think verse 11 is also, 10 and 11 are also interesting. He talks about how that this thing was created with love for or by, maybe some translations say, the daughters of Jerusalem. It wasn't designed for the daughters to ride in. It was the king's. But it was decorated by the daughters of Jerusalem. And who are they? They seem to be these virgins, the harem in prospect here, from which Solomon might choose another bride. Go forth, O ye daughters of Zion. This may be the same group, or it may be the young women of the realm there in the capital. And they are encouraged to do what? To meet King Solomon in the gladness of his heart. The point is, here's this picture of this litter that is made by all of these women and cheered on by all of these people who bring their young daughters to say, oh, look, here's King Solomon and wife number 145 or 250 or whatever it might be on that day. It's not hard for us to see how twisted that is it? They're part of a game we don't want any part of. I'm so glad because I want to be one of this number. Not the Shulamite. She knew better. I think she was too influenced by God in that regard. You women of Jerusalem have taken great care to furnish the inside. Another modern translation reads, over it is cloth embroidered with gold. Its cushions are covered with purple cloth, lovingly woven by the women of Jerusalem. And they were proud to be a part of this whole scene. Go forth to meet Solomon. Go forth to cheer him on in his serial polygamy. Was there no one who stopped and said, this is not the way to go? God had said from the start, I don't want kings multiplying wives. And here's the crowd cheering as he goes on in his crown that he wore for his espousals and his weddings. You know, it's interesting. It's hard to separate this story from the story of polygamy. A couple of entries here from a couple of Bible dictionaries that I have. You probably have something similar or access to it. This is from Holman. Under the heading of family, he has a section on polygamy. Or as he says more specifically, polygyny. Polygamy being just multiple marriages. Polygamy being, for the most part, specifically, a man with many wives, not a woman with many husbands, which was very uncommon. But it was considered an abnormal development of the family in the Old Testament, first practiced by Lamech, the descendant of Cain. He says it is never cast in a positive light in the Scriptures, but is a source of rivalry and bickering, as seen in the lives of Abraham and Jacob. The harems of the kings of Israel are presented as excess, that is rebuked in the monarchy. Deuteronomy 17, that passage we just referred to. Because of polygamy, the kings of Israel were persuaded to worship false gods. We all know the sad story, the epitaph of Solomon's later years in 1 Kings 11. The normal family unit in Israel was never polygamous. I think that's important to remember. We read these stories, we think everybody was a polygamist back then. No, they weren't. In fact, you had to have some money to have several wives. This was a rich man's game. But it was never widespread. But it was practiced, and it just time and again. We're studying Genesis, for those who are visiting with us in our adult class, and we will be studying that in the other classes next quarter. You look over into Genesis 16, and it's Sarah who brings Hagar and says, now have a child by her. I can't have a child. Didn't that bring all that happiness? Or in chapter 29, when you see the story of his grandson, we were looking just recently at the story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah and all the problems that caused. I think he's right. We find these stories in Scripture, but they're not there to give us an encouragement of that regard. By the way, we tend to think, because we live in Alabama in the 21st century, that this is something that we hadn't seen in 1,000 years. Oh, it's still going on in the world. There's still places where polygamy is practiced. But it's always been rebellion to God. It has never been something that blessed men. This is the New Bible Dictionary in talking about this. Monogamy is implicit in the story of Adam and Eve. That is true, isn't it? One flesh. Since God created only one wife for Adam, and yet polygamy is adopted from the time of Lamech and is not forbidden in Scripture, it would seem that God left it to man to discover by experience that his original institution of monogamy was the proper relationship. And he goes on to point out all the troubles that we can read about in Scripture. Elkanah is another great example of the strife in a household where you have one man and two women who are devoted to one man, trying to share a husband in that case. ISBE points out the term itself, polygamy, is a misnomer. It's an attempt to cover up by the term plural marriage what's not a marriage at all. That never was God's design for a marriage. Two women with one man, or 1,000 women with one man. How can you have a help meet or suitable for a man in that case? How can it be bone by bone and flesh of my flesh, one for which you would leave father and mother and cleave to in that circumstance? He goes on to say it's a moral wrong. The wrong to women in denying to her the rights and privileges of a monogamous marriage. She ought to be able to expect more of a marriage than that. And by the way, so should a man. The devotion and devoting to one. So it's quite a scene we have with Solomon's litter as it comes to town from the wilderness, with all its splendor, but with the sadness that it represents. Let's go back to our text now in chapter 4 as we divide it. And notice how that the king addresses the Shulamite and flatters her in order to woo her. The old translation is here on the chart, and it begins, "Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes within thy locks. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead. And thy teeth are like a flock of sheep that are even shorn, which came up from the washing, whereof every one bears twins, and none is barren among them. Thy lips are like a thread of scarlet. Thy speech is comely. Thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate within thy locks. Thy neck is like a tower of David, builded for an armory, whereupon there hang 1,000 bucklers and all shields of mighty men. Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins, which feed among the lilies." I think this is Solomon speaking. Again, the author does not choose always to label, then so-and-so said, then so-and-so said. We have to discern that. But it seems evident when he's talking about the Tower of David and the armory there. That sounds like Solomon, doesn't it? So he does. And what does he say? Well, he compliments her appearance. That's what he does. Now, we might find it to be rather strange, might wrinkle your nose at this idea of being like, your hair being like a goat's. We say, well, that doesn't sound very complimentary. I read a book about that. A guy was writing about the song. I read a lot of books about the song. And I remember this point this fellow made. He said, I never really got the depth of that till I went over to that land and I saw some of those wild goats up on the side of those mountains. And when you go up the side of a mountain, you go up this way, then you find a little crevice and you go up this way, and then you go up this way, and then you go up this way. And if you look at those goats, those with the long hair and shining in the sun and swinging back and forth as they're making their way up the mountain, he said, I sort of got the idea. Maybe it wasn't as crazy as I thought it was. He's complimenting her. The beauty of her hair as she walks along, her eyes, her teeth are whiter than sheep freshly washed. That's probably not a compliment we've used very much. They match perfectly, not one is missing. Think about a time and a place where there are no orthodontists, there's no dental care. For somebody to have beautiful teeth would not be all that common. But he said, you have a beautiful smile and a beautiful figure. Your neck is long and proud, and she's attractive to him physically. And that's what he notices. That's what he talks about. And by the way, that's not all bad. I don't think that God put attraction there before men. Now, if it goes into lust and to mental adultery, that's another story. But to find someone attractive or beautiful and to say so is certainly not something, I think, that's just in and of itself out of bounds. But the thing is lacking. And every time Solomon speaks, you find this. He sees her appearance. He's taken by her form. But there's no intellectual connection. He doesn't talk about her mind. He doesn't talk about her spirit. He doesn't talk about her spiritually. And I think that's a significant point. So he's complimenting her in a way that he thinks is very appealing. But it's really very superficial in many ways. And then in verse 6, I believe it is the beloved that enters the picture. He's there. We said that from chapter 1. He's there even when he's not there. She can hear his voice. She can feel his presence. And so while the king is speaking to her, she can hear his voice speaking. Beginning there in verse 6, until the day break and the shadows flee away, I will get me to the mountains of myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. Thou art all fair, my love, there is no spot in thee. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse. From Lebanon, look from the top of Amana, from the top of Shinir and Hermon, from the lions' dens and from the mountains of the leopards. What's he talking about there? And how do we know? Why would we have any idea this is the beloved? Well, my answer to that is because I think this is a response to something we read earlier. If you go back to chapter 2, as we divide the book, here we find again the longing of the Shulamite for her beloved. My beloved, verse 16 of chapter 2, my beloved is mine and I am his. He feeds among the lilies. And then she really utters a plea to say, until the day break and the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved, and be thou like a roe or a young hart upon the mountains of Bether. We said that word Bether doesn't seem to be any geographical location. The word means division. It's interesting how the words or the term mountains is used in the song. It's used in a couple of different ways. I think it's used of the mountains of delight and it's used of the mountains of separation. Not really literal, geographical. But a mountain suggests the idea of something in one sense inaccessible. So she's pleading, though she's here in the care of or in the custody of the king. I have not forgotten you. Don't forget me. Do not give up on our relationship. And I think what we find here is the response of the beloved. She had said, until the day break and the shadows flee away, turn, my beloved. Don't forget me. Well, here in chapter 4 and verse 6, until the day break and the shadows flee away, I will get me to the mountain of myrrh, to the hill of frankincense. It's a reassurance that you have not forgotten me and I have not forgotten you. And I'm not giving up on you. And I'm not giving up on us. He sees her as fair indeed, but with no spot. I cannot help but think that language leaves room not just for a lack of physical blemish, but But there's something pure about this woman that he appreciates and he admires. I think he talks about that more later. The beloved sees her as being pure, and that draws him, attracts him. He loves her not just physically, but spiritually. He loves her spirit. And then in verse 8, come with me from Lebanon, Amana, Shinir, Hermon. I don't think that he's speaking here literally geographically, but that's the tallest mountains you can find in that area. Hermon's the tallest mountain around. And as far as they're concerned, she's on the top of that mountain. Inaccessible. Out of reach, it seems. And by the way, the lion's den. Lions don't usually congregate at the top of a mountain, but this is, again, not literal. It's a figure. And I think the lions are probably two-footed lions, don't you? And those leopards? Here you are in the lion's den at the top of a mountain. But I'm not giving up on us. And he calls her to come. Well, I should make a point about the word spouse, what I meant to say. Verse 8, he calls her, and he does this more than one time, my spouse. When I read that term, I normally think about two people who are married. That's the way it's generally used. We still use the word that way. But it is also used in Scripture not only of those who are married, but those who are promised to be married. And for the first time, I began to understand that these two are not just acquaintances, but they're people who had promised to marry one another. And whatever the circumstance was for her to be taken in by Solomon, this bond remains. My beloved, my spouse, my promised bride, as the Amplified Bible puts it. And notice in the next verse, verse 9, he continues, thou hast ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. How fair is thy love, my sister, my spouse. How much better is thy love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments than all spices. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue. The smell of thy garments is the smell of Lebanon. Not exactly the expensive perfume that she received in chapter 1 in Solomon's court, but he is impressed by her, even without the finery. He calls her again his spouse, and he calls her my sister. Now that seems to be off-putting to us. There's nothing incestuous here. It's not literally that she is somehow kin to him physically. But I think the word here for sister is used outside of the realm of sexuality to suggest the familial, to suggest that bond, that partnership, that fellowship that in the best sense is found in families. I've known some brothers and sisters that fought like cats and dogs, and maybe they all do at a certain age. But as we get older, we value and love. This is family. That's the way he feels about her. His spouse, yes, and his family. He loves her, not just lusts for her, he loves her. A long and focused relationship with these two. Notice back again in the text here. He had said, you've ravished my heart with one of your eyes. You know, what does he mean by that? More the idea of ravishing the heart, first of all. One fellow put it, a verb, ravish, meaning to stir the heart, to make it beat faster. Everybody in this room understands that. Somebody that makes your heart skip a beat, we sometimes say. We know what that is. These are two people in love. You think Solomon could feel that way about wife number 141? Not a chance. But these two people know what a marriage is supposed to be. This is what they desire. This is what they've been working toward. This is what they plan to have. With one of thine eyes, it means he's looking one way and then another at the same time, but with one glance, as maybe your translation says. Just a glance of you fills my heart. It is enough. You are enough. You know, Solomon earlier in chapter 1, wasn't it, talked about how that you look beautiful with all the chains and all of the jewels. This is chapter 1, verses Verse 10, thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels and with chains of gold. But her beloved, in his eyes, just one glance, and it doesn't matter what what finery you have. You are enough. You are enough. And then he says, thy love is better than wine. We've talked about this in an earlier lesson. The use of the word wine in the Song of Solomon. So many seem to have the idea that yayin, this word for wine in the Hebrew, is an intoxication. And that what he's saying is that, love is like intoxication. I don't think that's the point. I don't think he's praising here drunkenness, even figuratively. I think instead he's looking at wine, and that word certainly can be used for what is not fermented, heavily fermented. You can get drunk on wine, there's no doubt, but there's a substance that could be called wine and is called wine that may be the product of the grape, the fresh squeezed grape. A product that could be cut with water. And yet it has a sweetness about it, that in a culture where all they had to drink was water and milk, it was a delight, it was a treat. And so instead of saying over and over again, your love makes me drunker than wine, I don't think that's a compliment. We might see how that could be true, but I think what he's saying instead is a relationship with you, to look at you, is as sweet to me as anything could be. That, I think, is the point that he's making there. I wanted to get into the next section, but I think we will pause at that point. But I really think the next section is the key section of the book. And I'll offer this just as a thought ahead. Sometimes when people look at the ending of the Song of Solomon, they're rather let down. It doesn't end like we think it ought to end. We're waiting for this story. We're waiting for the great climax where you have these two people who finally are together and they marry and the sparks fly and it's wonderful. And that's really not how it ends exactly. But I think the book is structured in such a way that the highlight of the book is in the middle of the book. And that's what's next in our study. In this garden of love that's described in the latter part of 4 and the beginning of 5. And that's what I want to talk with you about, Lord willing, next time we get to talk about this. I appreciate your kind attention. If you have a question, a disagreement, feel free to talk with me. I'll be glad to hear from you and appreciate your input in this regard. Okay, let's see. I think we got the song set up. Yeah. Song number 829. Rodney will lead us in this song. What an important point. Prepare to meet your God. If you're here tonight and you're not ready, if the Lord were to come now, you'd be unprepared. Don't leave this building before you make things right with God. Be baptized into Christ, or as a child of God, return to Him if you've strayed from Him. He longs to receive you. If there's some way we can help you, let us know right now while we stand and sing. Will you come?